Looking at the reading 11 study questions for the first part of Plato's Credo, I think these are two pretty clear, straightforward questions. Number one, what does Credo want Socrates to do? And what reasons does he give to convince him to do it? Do you think he makes a good case? Well, he wants Socrates to accept his help. And that help is to smuggle him out of the jail, out of Athens, to safety so he can avoid the death sentence. Now, what reasons does he give to convince him to do it? Well, various reasons. One, that the trial itself is a mockery. No one really could take it seriously. It was what's he called? It was a fiasco. And it came to an absurd conclusion. That no serious person thinks that Socrates is impious or that he corrupts the youth. It was ridiculous. It should never have happened. And so if you were to smuggle yourself out of the city to avoid the death sentence, no one could possibly blame you because the trial was absurd. What else does he say? Well, how could you do this to your friends? We're all going to look bad. If you let yourself get killed here, people will assume that we weren't willing to take the risks necessary to help you. How could you do that to us? Make us look so bad. I think he even mentions his children. How can you leave your sons, who are just boys, to be raised without a father? So does he make a good case? I don't know. It's not a bad case. I mean, it's not a case that is obviously bad. The trial was a fiasco. It was absurd. Will the community think badly of his friends? I don't know, probably. He would be orphaning his children. They're not obviously bad reasons. I don't know if it's a good case. It's obvious that Socrates doesn't regard it as a good case, but he gives his argument for why it's not a good case. Number two, on what basis does Socrates think they should decide the question as to what Credo wants him to do, which is being smuggled out of Athens? And do you think this is the right approach? I think some care is needed to answer that first part of that question. So let's take a look at the text. I think that the answer to that question is right here on page 7. Socrates says, from these premises, I proceed to argue the question whether I ought or ought not to try to escape without the consent of the Athenians. And if I am clearly right in escaping, then I will make the attempt, but if not, I will abstain. That is, whether or not I accept your help will depend upon what I decide is right. The other considerations which you mention of money and loss of character and the duty of educating children are, I fear, only the doctrines of the multitude. It's what people think, but not necessarily what's true. Right? Who would be as ready to call people to life if they were able as they are to put them to death, and with this little reason. But now, since the argument has thus far prevailed, the only question which remains to be considered is whether we shall do rightly, either in escaping or in suffering others to aid in our escape, and paying them in money and thanks, or whether we shall not do rightly. And if the latter, then death or any other calamity which may ensue upon my remaining here must not be allowed to enter into the calculation. That is, the answer to the question I asked is the basis upon which Socrates will make his decision is on the basis of what is right. What is right? What is just? What is ethically the right thing to do, not what is most expedient. All these other considerations may or may not be relevant, but next to the question about whether it would be right, they pale in comparison. They are irrelevant in comparison because ultimately they could not possibly justify him doing something wrong. Do you think that this is the right approach? I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Ideally, yes, we should always do what's right. Practically, I don't know.